أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وهادينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وجاءوا أباهم عشاء يبكون قالوا يا أبانا إنا ذهبنا نستبق وتركنا يوسف عند متاعنا فأكله الذئب وما أنت بمؤمن لنا ولو كنا صادقين وجاءوا على قميصه بدم كذب قال بل سولت لكم أنفسكم أمرا فصبر جميل والله المستعان على ما تصفون. وجاءت سيارة فأرسلوا واردهم فأدلى دلوه قال يا بشرى هذا غلام وأسروه بضاعة والله عليم بما يعملون. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. So we got to the point in the story of Yusuf where the brothers, they approach their father Yaqub and they come to him crying and weeping in a state of real emotion, telling him that, oh, our father, unfortunately, we have bad news for you. What's the bad news? That our brother Yusuf, we left him alone for just a couple of moments while we were playing together and while we were enjoying, and all of a sudden, there was a wolf that came to him and ate him. وَمَا أَنْتَ بِمُؤْمِنٍ لَنَا وَلَوْ كُنَّا صَادِقِينَ. And we know, oh our father, that you're not going to believe us, even though we're telling the truth. Over here, we talked about this briefly last week, but just to continue the conversation, and I think it's the most important segment, or the most important extraction during this segment of these verses, or in this particular section. We love to justify our behavior many a times when it comes to our acts of sin or transgression. And over here we know, through an abundance of verses of the whole Quran, as well as through ahadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhi salam, about the importance of making sure that we are in control over our own souls. Inna a'da aduwak an-nafsu allati bayna jabbayk, as the hadith states, that your greatest enemy is that soul which rests between your two shoulders. Wa nafsin wa ma sawaha fa'alhamaha fujuraha وَتَقْوَاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to this soul, speaks to this essential self that is within the human being, and says that if you cultivate it and if you care for it, قَدْ أَفْلَهَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. If you care for it, you will be successful in this world and in the next. And if you don't care for it, you're not going to be successful neither in this world nor in the next. And if we kind of rewind a little bit to the earlier portion of these ayat of the story of Yusuf, when Yusuf comes to his father and tells him that I saw this dream, right? I saw this dream of the stars, the sun, the moon, everything was prostrating to me. What does Yaqub tell his son, Yusuf? Does anyone remember? Don't tell your brothers why. He doesn't say that we're going to be, of course that was the outcome, right? They will be jealous, but he doesn't tell them that. He says something a little bit more specific. Anybody remember? We talked about this.
That they'll plot against you.
They'll plot against you. Why? He says, قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تَقْصُصْ رُؤْيَاكَ عَلَىٰ إِخْوَتِكَ فَيَكِيدُوا لَكَ كَيْدًا. They will plot against you. Why? إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. Because surely the Satan is your clear enemy, is the enemy of man. So in the beginning part of the story, Yaqub is telling Yusuf, telling him, hey, be careful because this shaitan is really, really dangerous. Over here, if we fast forward back to where we are at this moment, okay, he tells his own sons now, بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا. Your souls have deceived you. Before he's telling Yusuf that shaitan can deceive you. Shaitan will deceive these children of mine, your brothers. Over here, he's telling them that, hey, your soul has deceived you. What is the relationship then between the shaitan and the self? The shaitan and this soul, right? Over here, there are different sort of theories. But virtually one of them is that the shaitan doesn't have any control over the human being. The only one who has control over the human being is ourselves. And it's so important that we make sure that the shaitan's goal is to deceive the human being, to deceive the soul, many times in order to justify our wrongdoings and our incorrect behavior or our sin or our transgression. And we talked about this before, that when the brothers are all sitting together amongst themselves and they're deciding what it is that they're going to do, right, in terms of getting rid of Yusuf, one of them says, kill him. One of them says, let's take him out of the city, right? And then what do they say afterwards? We talked about this, right? That we're going to be good after. We're going to become amongst the Salihin. We're going to be pious. We're going to ask for forgiveness. We're going to do all of it. But this is just the last time we're going to allow ourselves to commit an act of sin, right? But that's not how our souls work. Because the minute that we find one opportunity to justify our behavior, we're going to find another opportunity to justify later down the road. That's what God is trying to demonstrate to us. And that's undoubtedly what Yaqub is telling his sons at this moment, right? The same goes for our physical body. There's a lot of unhealthy food in that table, directly in front of me here right now, right? You can tell yourself, I'm only going to eat one donut, I'm only going to have one slice of pizza. But what happens, right? There is this essential desire that overcomes the human being to eat as much as you possibly can because it's really unhealthy and you're so attached to these things that taste amazing but they're not particularly good for you. Once you open the door to eat one, right, there's potential for you to eat 2 or 3 or 4. You follow what I'm saying? Sorry, that was the first time I'm listening so attentively to my lectures all these years. Why?
This is my first time listening.
So attentively, yeah.
I like this concept. I think it's really interesting, and there are philosophical, there are philosophical origins of this concept and biological. It's there's a saying: it's easier to stick to your principle 100% of the time than 99% of the time.
It's easier to stick to your principles 100% of the time instead of 99%.
Instead of 99% of the time, yeah, because that taste is really, really important. And I think there's a lot of sort of stuff in the Quran about that's the whole genesis of the fall. It's that taste opens your world up to all of that.
You're right. Yep.
So I like this point. Thank you, Sheikh.
No, thank you. So this theme that you're mentioning, it comes across in the conversations between Yaqub and his sons in Surah Yusuf multiple times. So in the beginning, it's about their relationship with Shaitan, that if you tell them one thing, they're going to start to plot against you. That's it. It's over. So don't bring it up at all. Let's not converse. And I said that according to some hadith, according to some commentators of the Quran, they will state that the reason why they ended up, doing what they did is because they found out about it, right? They were exposed to it a little bit. And over here, again, Yaqub is telling his sons, he says that you are the ones who did this to yourself. Meaning that he still has some belief that maybe his son might be alive, but at the end of the day, he has no control. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where to turn, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why he states, وَجَاءُ عَلَىٰ قَمِيسِهِ بِدَمٍ كَذِبٍ. They came to him with, this fake blood. But by the way, what does this fake blood or mean? According to most commentators of the Quran, that they had killed the wolf and they had put the blood of the wolf on the shirt. Wallahu a'lam. Then he states, قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا. You have made this situation light for yourselves. You have justified it. You have done this to yourself. But then, what is his response? فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. My responsibility, now he virtually turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He's upset with the situation. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. But rather, I have to have the sense of beautiful patience. What does that mean? At the end of the day, patience is to bear a trial and tribulation. In Allah ma'as-sabirin, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with the ones who are patient. But more than that, to have what is known as sabrun jameel is to only turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the midst of trials and tribulations. In other words, and this is mentioned within other ayat of the whole Quran as well, is about the importance of allowing for our grief not to be exposed to anyone else, but whereby we virtually transfer or we translate our patience into dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's like a higher level. Doesn't mean that every single believer can like manifest that overnight. It takes time. But Yaqub is saying that my only place of resort at this moment after losing my son is to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not even worth it for me to complain to anyone else, because I'm content knowing that God knows. Someone might ask this question then. They say, okay, if Yaqub was emanating or manifesting this notion of beautiful patience, and that he only turns back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then why is it that he cried for so many years? And then he cried to the extent whereby he almost became blind, oh takuna min al-hadikin, that he might die, like from his grief, as other verses of the Quran mention. Why didn't he just remain patient? Even his sons come and ask him this question, as we'll take a look at later on in the discussion. They come to him and they say, oh, our father, you've been crying for so many years over Yusuf, we're worried about your health. So he responds to them that this grief of mine is a complaint to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't understand. And over here we're able to determine that the grief of Yaqub for Yusuf is not only the grief of a father for a son, but more than that, it is the grief of someone who has lost a representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from amongst them. Which is why when we talk about our grief, for instance, for the Prophet and his family, alayhi salam, this grief has this sense of adoration, right, within our tradition. Or it has this sense of, a cumulative reward. The one who cries for Hussein, they get this. The one who, so on and so forth. Because it's not only a grief, right, of the loss of a loved one, but it is the fact that the representative of God is no longer present in front of me. And, in addition to that, it's a demonstration of love and loyalty too. And over here, Yaqub, knowing very well that his son Yusuf was the representative of God, at the very least via the dream or other sort of manifestations of revelation, this perhaps explains his intense grief. But he also tells his sons that I'm not, my tears and my cries and my complaints are not to any of you. Like, leave me alone, because this is a conversation between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَجَاءُوا عَلَى قَمِيصِهِ بِدَمٍ كَذِبٍ قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. Verse number 19, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. So that's that, right? And this is where we stopped last week. So he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The brothers of Yaqub, the brothers of Yusuf, the sons of Yaqub, feel that they have, they've gotten rid of Yusuf. There's nothing else to worry about anymore. وَجَاءَتْ سَيَّارَةٌ فَأَرْسَلُوا وَارِدَهُمْ فَأَدْلَى دَلْوَهُ قَالَ يَا بُشْرَ هَذَا غُلَامٌ وَأَسَرُّوهُ بِضَاعَةً وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ. So where was Yusuf thrown? He was thrown into a well. We talked about this last week. He was thrown into a well by his brothers. And a soon while later, a caravan came to pass by that well. So now, I want you to remember a conversation that we began with the very first day of our discussion around Surah Yusuf, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why the story is really, really beautiful, is that we're consistently opening new chapters, right? So if we're watching a movie, that one scene ended and now a new scene is starting, right? That was the scene between Yaqub and his sons, and now we move on to the next scene where now Yusuf is alone in this well, right? A young boy. And a caravan comes. And the caravan sends a water drawer, somebody who go and throws the bucket down like we see in the movies, right, with the rope, in order to pick up water. And as he looks down, what does he see? He sees there's a young boy, right? And over here he calls out, Ya Bushra, means great news. I got some, glad tidings for you. Not only are we getting water today, but we also have a slave, right? We also have someone that we can utilize in our caravan. Ya Bushra hada ghulam. So they took him, and they decided to utilize him as a piece of merchandise, as a piece of property, right? Meaning what? That they desired to sell him. We're going to make some money off of him. And then at the end of it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wallahu alimun bima ya'malun. And surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what it is that they were doing. On a couple of different levels. It could be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knew that they were going to utilize Yusuf for property. On a deeper level, Yusuf at that moment, perhaps he felt some relief. He said, wait a minute, I'm not going to die in this well. I have someone to help and support me. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting Yusuf through a test and through a trial. I'm going to open up one quick parenthesis to just mention this. It's mentioned in a hadith. I never looked into the authenticity or anything of the hadith, but I've seen it before. It says that morning, now listen to this, that morning, before Yusuf alayhi salam, he went out with his brothers and they conspired against him in the way that they conspired against him. It says that Yusuf alayhi salam looked at himself in the mirror. Now we know Yusuf is like this really beautiful boy, right? He looks at himself in the mirror and he said, wow, I'm really, really beautiful, And now take a look at this. Look at the next verse. وَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ دَرَاهِمُ مَعْدُودَةٍ وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ. And a few moments later, after they picked him up from the well, they sold him for a cheap price. A few dirhams, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and he was worth virtually nothing. And so we go back to this hadith that Yusuf, he didn't do anything wrong, but he had that sense of pride in him, right? Oh, mashallah, Allah created me like this, look who I am. And over here, in order perhaps to, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tries His prophets and His messengers in a different way that He tries us, that He was putting him through a little bit of tribulation there. That you thought you were somebody, look, we sold you not for any price, but for a cheap, worthless price, In order to understand, at least for us, and again, not to say that Yusuf even committed a sin, no, he just had this thought that entered into his mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to remain humble at every junction, at every moment during the course of our life. To never assume that I'm in any particular place, that I'm in any particular position, that I have any station. No. To know our virtual worthlessness, or our absolute and utter need from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one. And number two, what we also learn from this, again, is that this world, my friends, is a world of trials and tribulations like we know. That we are bound, we are shackled in this dunya, and even if we are the prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the son of a prophet, like Yusuf, we still go through examination and trials in this dunya. Doesn't matter. And for the one who works hard and remains diligent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, reward them and not, allow for these tribulations, not allow for these examinations to go in vain. But once we accept that, it's easier. Once we accept the fact that we go through hardship and difficulty, let me just say this to open up one person. Last week, when I wasn't physically present, and we did this online, right? For those of you who participated, it was the first time that I had been speaking into my phone only, or into a Zoom in a really long time, because post-pandemic world, and it was really, really hard for some reason. Right? I told Melanie afterwards, I was like, oh my God, how terrible was my halakha. I was like, it didn't make any sense. It's so much easier to talk in front of people. Quick observation. Anyhow, over here, the second thing that we learn is that we are bound by these trials and tribulations, and once we accept them, then things become a lot easier. Life becomes easier once we know that we are going to go through hardship and difficulty. Does that make sense? If every single day you're telling yourself how much you hate, you hate your commute, or you hate school, or you hate work, or whatever it might be, that you just want things to be a little bit easier for you, you're never going to find satisfaction in it. But once you embrace the fact that, okay, this is hard, it's going to have its own challenges, I'm going to have my own obstacles, whatever it might be, then thereafter, it's going to be so much easier to commit to, and be like, okay, you know what? I know that this is part of what it is, I liken this to, when my children were born. When my first daughter was born, I had no idea what to expect. I remember going to my mom and my dad, I say, how come you never told us that parenting was this hard? They're like, well, what do you think? What did you think it was going to be like? I was like, I don't know. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Like nothing. Like it's so hard, And they're like, well, even if we explained it to you, how would you have understood? Because you didn't experience it. I was like, but still, nobody ever told me. Thereafter, once I accept the fact that, okay, I'm not going to sleep like a lot. I'm not going to do anything. Like my life, in the way that I saw it before my child was born into this world, doesn't exist anymore because this is my responsibility and I have to do what I have to do. All of a sudden, you're able to commit to it and you're able to actualize and realize, okay, like I'm going to be okay because this is what I got to do. You get what I'm saying? But if you're always kicking yourself and telling yourself you can't do it, it's going to be that much more challenging. So again, Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown into this well. He is lifted up by this caravan, and then they sell him for a worthless price, insignificant amount of wealth. Verse number 21. وقال الذي اشتراه من مصر لامرأته أكرم مثواه عسى أن ينفعنا أو يتخذه ولده. So the man who eventually bought him was from Egypt. And then he goes to his wife and he says, telling his wife, let's make sure that we treat this boy well. Because maybe one day we're going to utilize him, he'll be useful for us, his presence. Or we may even adopt him and, keep him as our own son. So they, again, had this perception that we're going to utilize like this extra labor in the house. And if he ends up being a good kid, we can even adopt him and treat him like our own child. And over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something beautiful. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلِنُعَلِّمَهُ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَى أَمْرِهِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So, again, I want you to imagine the scene of the story, right? This man from Egypt, he goes to his wife, he says, take care of this boy, right? Maybe we'll honor him. Maybe we'll keep him as our own son. Maybe we can find some use for him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interjects into the story. What does he say? He says, and this is the moment when we placed Yusuf exactly where we wanted to place him. Meaning that none of this happens out of coincidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very vigilant over what is taking place and what is transpiring. What does he state? He says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ. And then we had established Yusuf in this land. And that we teach him the interpretation of dreams. And then he states, وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَى أَمْرِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows what He's doing. He's aware and He has authority over this, over His commands. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. But most people do not know. In other words, He's also trying to tell the reader, you still remember that dream that Yusuf had in the beginning? He says, don't worry, we're going to come back to that. That dream that Yusuf had at a very young age, it's not in vain. There's going to be a reality to that. There's going to be a demonstration of the station of Yusuf, but just not right now. You follow what I'm saying? Good? Or no good? وَلَمَّا, he continues, subhanahu wa ta'ala, verse number 22. وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Verse number 22 begins by stating, وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ. And when he came of age. What does it mean when he came of age? It happens, or this particular language is employed multiple times within the Quran. وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ. When he became of age. Some state that this could mean that when Yusuf alayhi salam had reached the age of puberty. And that's sort of most likely in the anecdote of Yusuf. Others state, as our hadith state, for instance, that the age of balagha ashuddahu, reaching of the age, is when the adult reaches the age of 33 or the age of 40 or whatever it might be. Anyway, for when we have all of these discrepancies within the narrations, whatever, we take a look at it contextually. And if we understand kind of the story of Yusuf and what's taking place, we know that he was at a very young age at the time when he leaves his father's home, when he gets thrown into this well. We don't know what happens virtually over the next several years. What we do know now is, وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ, after some years, and after Yusuf attained a particular age, perhaps, that he attained adulthood, we gave him knowledge, we gave him wisdom, and we gave him knowledge. Likely, this means that now he has assumed his position and this divine gift of prophethood. Okay. وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And this is the way that we reward those who do good. A couple of important points really, really quickly. What happens in between? What happens from the day that he has entered into the home of this, that he enters into Egypt, until the rest of the episode? We don't know. We can speculate. We don't know. Why don't we know? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't think it's important for us to know. It doesn't matter, in other words. At the end of the day, we mentioned this in the very introduction, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention every single detail within his anecdotes that are mentioned within the whole Quran. He only wants to present to us that which is meaningful. The second thing that I wanted to share with you is that he states, وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ, that this is the way that we reward the virtuous, the good doers, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell us something about Yusuf. That he goes through hardship after hardship. He's away, he's a kid at the end of the day, right? He's away from his father. His brothers betray him. He's thrown into a well. He is traded for worthless. He was traded for nothing, right? And now he's reached a certain age that throughout this entire process, he still maintained good deeds. He still was virtuous. He still had some sense of morality. And for someone who engages their faith in that way, who understands Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that way, that at the end of the day, God is going to find a way out for them. You follow what I'm saying? وراودته التي هو في بيتها عن نفسه وغلقت الأبواب وقالت هيت لك قال معاذ الله إنه ربي أحسن مثواي إنه لا يفلح الظالمون. Okay, so now we enter into the next sort of stage. We've honored and we've placed Yusuf in this way, in this city for a reason. We're aware of what's happening and what's taking place. The next verse he says that Yusuf grew up after several years. He became of the age of an adult, and at this moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala endowed with him certain knowledge and certain sort of virtues, and because of his good doing we have raised him in his rank. And then all of a sudden what happens? He says, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 23, the woman in whose house he was solicited him. This is the famous story of Zulaykha, right? For those of you not familiar, we'll speak about it now. Now he's in this home, right, of this man who had purchased him, and he grows up in this house now. And that same lady who he was commanded by his wife to take care of him and to honor him, and to see what benefit he would bring to their home. He is now of a certain age of adulthood. We mentioned before that, of course, Yusuf alayhi salam is known for his beauty and for his attraction. She begins to solicit him, and she closes the doors. One day, she enters into a room, and she closes the doors. وَغَلَقَتِ الْأَبْوَابِ وَقَالَتْ هَيْتَ لَكَ. And she called to him, come. And at this moment, she seeks to seduce him. To which he responds, قَالَ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ. He states, God forbid, I can't. This is not appropriate. And the next verse states, إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَاي. That surely, so this can be read two different ways. إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَاي. Surely he is my master, and I'm living in his home. Meaning that your husband, I'm under his protection. I can't engage in this behavior, and he has given me a good home. He's taken care of me. إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And surely if I do the wrong thing, I'm not going to be successful. إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَاي. That there's no way I can engage in intimacy with you at this moment. How can that happen when I'm living in your husband's home, right? And he's taken care of me. He's done good to me. Another way to read it is when he states, "Innahu Rabbi," surely he is my Lord. Not he, as in the husband of this man, but he, as in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, innahu Rabbi, he is my Lord, right? Is vigilant over me. Ahsana matwa, and he's done really good to me. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in spite of all of the difficulties that I've had to go through, he's taken care of me. Which is why, more likely, when he begins to respond to her name was Zulaykha, he states, Ma'ad Allah, says, God forbid, surely this Lord of mine is taking care of me. I can't engage in sin like this. إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ, and surely the wrongdoers, they're not going to be successful. In verse number 24, everyone follow me? Anyone questions? We'll get into some questions afterwards. Verse number 24, and inshallah we'll go into more detail on these next week as well. In verse he continues, وَلَقَدْ حَمَّتْ بِهِ وَحَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَنْ رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّي كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. She certainly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, she certainly desired him. And at this moment, he also had a desire for her. لَوْلَا أَنْ رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّهِ, had he not been exposed to the evidence of his Lord, to the proof of his Lord. What does it mean? Did all of a sudden some sort of like revelation come to him at that moment? What takes place like at this moment? According to some hadith, that when Yusuf alayhi salam, he initially rejects her and says, no, like I can't engage in this with you. According to hadith, it says that Zulaykha, this woman, she says, what are you afraid about? Are you afraid about this God of ours? Meaning that there was a idol in the room. He says, let me take a like handkerchief and cover his eyes. Meaning that our God, this idol, won't see what we're doing. Don't worry about it, right? And he says, no, right? There's another Lord. Forget this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-seeing. He's all-hearing. So he states, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَحَمَّ بِهَا, and he had this inclination. لولا أن رأى برهان ربه, but at that moment he was exposed to the proof. So meaning at that moment he became God conscious. He knows that at that moment I need to close the door. We talk about the difference now, or the comparison between these brothers of Yaqub, these brothers of Yusuf, the sons of Yaqub, and Yusuf alayhi salam. What differentiates them? You guys remember that story that I told you some weeks ago about when Yusuf was a child and his father came to the sons and said, go and take this chicken, right? And kill this chicken, but no one's allowed to see you. You guys remember the story? You guys were there that day, right? And Yusuf responds, bringing back this chicken who's alive. He says, oh my father, the reason why I didn't kill it was because I couldn't go to any place where no one was watching. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one watching. His piety from a very young age. Yeah, the brothers of Yusuf, they make every single justification and excuse. But after this, we're going to say sorry. After this, we're going to ask for forgiveness. After this, we're going to change our life. Just once we get rid of Yusuf, our lives are going to be, they're going to be solved. It's all going to be okay. Over here, Yusuf alayhi salam could have said, if I just, commit this one act, that's it, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm going to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we're going to be good. It's fine. But no. He states, Lawla an ra'a burhana rabbi. At that moment, he remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This kind God who took care of him when he was in the well and saved his life and allowed for him to be treated very kindly by these same people who's now trying to deceive him. كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ. And at that moment, he, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he turned away this act of evil and indecency. He says, no, I'm not going to engage in this relationship. I'm sorry, I can't. And at that moment, God says, إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. Surely, Yusuf alayhi salam is one of our dedicated, sincere servants. Maybe we stop over here and we'll continue this story next week so we can engage in some conversation. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala